Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder, CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with Mike Simmons, the co-founder of Catalyst Sale. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody.
Mike, this week I want to turn us back to the common questions we get. These are questions that we get in some form or another so often that I'm just not attaching a name to them. I'm lumping all of them together and I'm going to ask you. And this week we're going to talk pricing because so many people ask about pricing in one form or another. They're asking, how should we price our product or service? Pretty basic question there, Mike. I mean, no specifics is what I mean by basic, although it's a complex question. I'm answering it, asking it, very basically. So where do you go with that? How should we price our product or service?
Is your question a truism?
Now you're just messing with me, Mike.
Yes, I am. So how should you approach price? It's, like I said, it's basic, or even you could even say this, pricing should be simple, but it's not always easy. Pricing should be really, from a customer perspective, it should be really easy to understand what they're paying for. Having a good or solid pricing method, and I'm going to try to stay away from using methodology based on some of the pre-discussion we had here about the difference between method and methodology and the study of methods. But when we start looking at pricing, it should be easy for a customer to determine how they're going to work with the organization they're working with. As an example, when I go into Starbucks, I know how much it's going to cost me to buy a small, medium, or large coffee. I forget what the smallest one is, but whatever the small is, then a grande, tall, grande, and venti. I can see it. It's up on a menu. If I go to a website, I can see pricing for maybe a subscription that someone is selling, or I can see pricing for a car that an organization is selling. And those are all public places where the information's there. I know what the service is that I'm going to get. I know what the product is that I'm going to get. I know how much it's going to cost me. And then I make my decision internally to say, is the product or service that I'm going to get worth the amount that I'm going to spend for it? Is it worth the trade of the dollars I have on my end to support this need or this want that I have? Am I willing to trade these dollars for that product or service? In the B2B space, similar concepts, similar approach. The primary difference in B2B is that the person you're working with, the person who's making the decision, or the group of people who are making the decision, most often are not the ones who are the end users of that product. So they're making that decision on behalf of others. So getting back into the pricing component, some key concepts to keep in mind whenever you're putting together your price is understanding what is the value that the customer is going to get out of the product or service that's going to be delivered. How can I make it very easy for that customer to understand what goes into the pricing method or approach that I'm using? And what are the variables that influence or impact price?
All right, Mike, I need to address something before we move on because you mentioned Starbucks and whatever they call their sizes, and I won't do it. I just order by the sizes I know. And there's certain words I just won't adopt. Truism, which is why Mike said truism, because I won't use the word truism. And so far, I have not adopted Starbucks sizes. I just order by the size I want.
And so far, we've gotten you to say that word twice on the podcast. So,
all right. So we're going to move on so you don't make me do it again.
Well, I can't make you do anything, Jody.
Oh, see, now you're going back to Carol Quinn and the external locus of control. So we're going to...
So back to pricing.
All right. You mentioned three parts of pricing. The first being, what is the value? Explain the difference between value and price.
Yeah. So my view of the world. So this is the world according to Mike. When it comes to value, value is something that I perceive, and that could be measured a couple of different ways. It could be the joy that I receive by driving around in my Jeep. Like, I love this time of year. I can take the top off of the Jeep. I can take the doors off of the Jeep. We can go off-road for more hours during the day than we can during the summer. And there's just this value that I get out of being able to do that. The value might be the hit that you get from the sugar rush of eating some cheesecake. There's going to be a time where that value is going to diminish. Like if I eat 6 pieces of cheesecake, I probably won't feel very good at the end of that session. So value is something that we perceive. So as we dig into this discussion and we try to get an understanding of the customers we work with, it's very important for us to understand what they assess value toward. Do they assess value toward the speed at being able to implement something? Do they assess value toward the confidence that this solution is going to work? Do they assess value based on cost that a problem is creating for them? Let's say they have some challenges in communication across their organization, and they've assessed that that communication challenge costs them $1 million a month. Over the course of a 12-month period, that challenge costs them $12 million. If I've got a solution to that problem, I don't necessarily need to solve it with a $1,000 solution. I should get fair value for what I'm delivering. And I should have an understanding of how the company on the other side values the implementation. So the only way, I think an important piece here, the only way that you can determine value from the perspective of the customer is to ask them. And sometimes you can ask the direct question. Sometimes you got to get to it through a couple of other questions. But your perceived value of the solution you deliver is likely not the same perceived value that your customer has.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. And to make it shorter, so it sounds like price is what you pay, value is what you get in return for that price that you pay. And a good example of that is Mike and I both like to go to Disney World. Although we've never been there together, we both like to go. And there is a price you pay for Disney, but the value is what you get while you're there. And yes, some people might say the price is high, but nobody usually disputes that the value is not greater than that price.
Yeah, and it's a good example and a great summary. Maybe we just cut out the first the 5 minutes of that soapbox that I was on. But when you talk about making an investment in a vacation at a place like Disney World, as an example, which is really expensive, and it just keeps getting more and more expensive, there are different aspects to the thing. There's some people who look at it as a one-time event, a trip where I'm going to be gone from Saturday to Sunday or Saturday to Friday during a given week, and the trip is contained right there. Now, there are others who might look at it as an overall experience, the type of conversations that you can have with your kids as you're going through the planning process, or with your family members as you go through the planning process, the vision that you have around what are your expectations around what you want to accomplish on this trip. And now there's value that you're getting out of those discussions that happen before you even make that trip. There may be even value that you get after the trip in the memories that you have. So when you think of pricing and you think of how you're delivering your solution to your customer, think about all parts of that value chain that they see. The experience pre-implementation, throughout the implementation, post-implementation. And how do you factor that into your general pricing methods? I almost said methodology.
See, you're just trying to mess with me again.
I am.
Okay, when we first started talking about pricing, you said there were 3 aspects, and I was taking notes, and I only wrote down the first 2 and the first letter of the third one. So hopefully you'll remember the third one, but I'm going to move to the second. And you said that the second part is, how can we make the price easy to understand? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this is all about setting expectations. How do you set expectations with your customer base around the variables that impact pricing? And the variables that impact pricing could be, one part of them, it could be your cost. What are your costs? What's your cost structure? If you want to get into that level of detail with the client. Sometimes there's the internal information. There's information that you hold yourself that can help you evaluate whether or not you have flexibility in price based on cost and based on margin. But one component of this is, how much does it really cost to deliver the service? What are the true costs of delivering the service? Another variable might be in a subscription-based service where you've got a number of people using the product, your relative cost per subscriber may decrease over time. it may be more expensive on a per user basis for the first 5 people that use the service than the last 5 people in a group of 1,000 that use the service. So you start to factor in things like variables into your pricing structure, which could be volume commitments that an organization might make to the number of users. Another factor that comes into play, and this we run into this with Slack, and we see this, and for anybody out there who uses Slack and pays for Slack, they know that not everybody inside your organization is going to use the product in every month. So they have a model out there where you can pay a little bit more or you pay a little bit less depending on how many active users are actually using the product. So variables become a very important piece here. And when we go through the discussion with organizations that we work with, what we try to do is whiteboard out, or use a thing like MindNode, whiteboard out all of the variables that a customer might see and variables that they may not see that we know are on our end that impact pricing or impact overall cost. And you start to see some overlap in those variables. Our relative cost for delivering a service inside an organization might be higher depending on the number of people that come in. But if you get into another situation where, let's say we're delivering a training session, whether we're delivering that training session to 5 people or we're delivering that training session to 50 people, our hard costs for supporting that are going to be the same. Our impact that we might have on the organization might change a bit. So their value might be much higher for them that they're able to deliver the training to a couple hundred people versus 5. And all of those need to be factored in. So Jody, I'm going to ask you, was that clear, or do I need to get into a deeper level of detail on the variables?
No, that was clear. And in fact, as soon as you started talking about variables, I realized when I wrote down W, that's what it was for. What are the variables? So that was the third aspect that you talked about with pricing. So we've got, what is the value? How can we make it easy for customers to understand? And it being the price. And then what are the variables to pricing? So when we get that common question, how should we price our product or service? I think that's the meat of what we're looking at. Those 3 items that Mike told us. So Mike, what else do we need to know? So we've covered those 3 aspects of price. What else do we need to know?
So I think the next thing that we need to know is market response. So there's this whole idea of how we can put together pricing in our own head, and we can come through these different variables, and we go through we different components and various assumptions. But it's one thing to do that from the perspective of the company. It's a completely different thing to do it from the perspective of the person who is going through the buying process. And as you go through those discussions with people who are going through the buying process, it's important to ask questions. And I know that's a common theme for the podcast, ask questions. But if we don't ask questions, we don't get the information from our customer base, then we're going to get ourselves into a situation where we start to make assumptions and we're going to increase our overall risk. So I think another key component of this discussion is the questions you ask of people in the marketplace and the data that you gather over time to influence your view on the pricing model that you're using as to whether or not it aligns with expectations in the market or it's significantly different. Maybe you're undervaluing the service that you're providing inside to your customer base and your pricing might be too low, or you're overvaluing the unique aspects of the product or service that you deliver and your price points might actually be too high.
Yes. Good stuff. Well, Mike, I think we've covered the basics of this question. And it's one, like I said, we get this enough that it needed to be covered, and we get it enough that I just lumped it into one question. If this discussion brings up any more questions you might have about pricing, then reach out to us and let us know. Mike gave us those 3 things. What is the value? How can we make the price easy for a customer to understand? And what are the variables in your price? If you have questions that go deeper or maybe specific questions about your product or service, whether it's for the podcast to be used as a question or you just want Mike's input, reach out to us and let us know. Mike, how can people contact you if they've got a question about pricing?
Jody, the best way to contact us is at Catalyst Sale on Twitter or at Simmons_M on Twitter. You can also go to the Catalyst Sale site and you'll see our live chat. You can ask questions there. And just as you were going through that, I thought of one thing that we didn't touch on that I'm going to ask my own listener question and then answer it, which is awesome.
Mike, we've got a listener question from Mike Simmons.
That's awesome. So Jody, I'm going to put you on the spot. So how do you handle the price objection? So your customer says, wow, the price is just too expensive. Can you give me a discount?
This is actually something I have dealt with recently. And I think some of it depends on where you're at. And it will go back to the third thing you talked about, the variables that go into pricing, because it could be, no, you can't budge at all. Or it could be you really need that sale and there is room that you can do it. Now, typically though, I don't budge on the price. If I have a price objection, I'll say, okay, I showed you the price. I showed you what you will get with that. If we need to come down on the price, what do you want to take out of here? And we can get your price down. So that's how I handle it. Another great objection buster I heard from Lee Cockrell, and there we go talking Lee again, but I just thought this was brilliant, somebody had done that same thing to him. Your price is high. Can we have a discount? And they said your price is expensive. And Lee said, if you view me coming to your organization as an expense and not an investment, I'm not the right guy for you anyway.
Yeah. And in both of those, you're just trying to shift the conversation, which is really good. It's an approach that works. Another approach, and this gets into, you kind of touched on it with the what would you like to remove or what can we remove? Another approach is to ask questions of the customer about too high relative to what? Like what are we That's comparing this to? And what you might find is that the perception of the customer relative to the product or the service that you're providing, their perception may be a bit skewed or maybe off or maybe different than what you expected that perspective to be. So by asking that question, that relative to what question, and you come up with your own language. I mean, I tend to be pretty direct, so I'll ask it. And sometimes I take a little bit more of the Columbo approach where I'm just the country bumpkin and I kind of stumble my way into the question. But it's what other data can I get from them to help inform me on how they're perceiving the price? They may truly just be testing. People want to make sure they felt like they got a good deal. And now the other thing they might be running into on that is maybe their role from a procurement perspective, maybe they're measured based on the idea that they've got to have a given discount based on list price. And if they don't meet that discount across all the products that they're buying on behalf of the organization, or meet that percentage across all the products they're buying on behalf of the organization, they might get themselves into a situation where they're not eligible for their bonus. So this gets back into empathy, and it gets back into that discussion around putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're working with. If you believe that you're going to solve the problem, you have a solution to the problem that they have inside their organization, and your solution is the right fit based on all of the work that you've done up into this point, stand firm on your price points, ask those questions, see if you can shift the conversation and make it less about the price, but more about the value that you're delivering into the organization, the business impact that you're going to have inside the organization. What you might find when you ask that question is the customer is actually making an assumption around how you've gone through the pricing. And if you can explain the things that are factored into your pricing, you'll put yourself in a better position when it comes to those discussions. I mean, I've been involved in those discussions where someone has said, okay, you know what, that makes more sense. I understand it. And we just move forward. So don't just respond to the objection with your first knee-jerk response, the one that's always worked for you. Ask a question, gather a little bit more data, because there's usually something behind that pricing objection or that request for the discount. And you want to get to that detail.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to mention is it's when someone says it's too high, your price is too high, all of us have a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction because we want everybody to take our price and say, oh my goodness, for what I'm getting, that's such a great value. Tell me where to sign. We all want that to happen. And when it doesn't, it stings a little bit, even when you're used to it, even when you know it's not a big deal. You always want it to go the other way. And rather than reacting in the way you want to at first, ask that question, price is too high relative to what? You don't know what that will uncover. It could uncover something about the market. It could uncover something about that customer. It could uncover something about you that you haven't realized yet. So, Mike, I have not done this before, but I'm going to start using this practice now.
You're going to incorporate that into your methodology? Or this will now be a truism?
Oh, wow. So before we started recording, Mike and I had a long discussion about those words, truism and methodology. And Mike has been misusing the word methodology for years without knowing it.
Years.
And that is a truism.
Yes, it is.
Well, if you have enjoyed this discussion about pricing and you know someone else who might get value from it, please go ahead and share it with them. And you can reach out to us with a question. Mike told you how you can do that, or find us on the social medias. So thank you so much for the discussion, Mike. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.